If you're a psychic medium and you're wanting to develop your gifts, chances are you've heard about mediumship development circles. Now, these are safe spaces that you can go to learn how to communicate with spirit and give those messages to people who are still here. But what if this practice isn't as healthy or as helpful as we've been led to believe? Over the last 5 years, psychic mediumship development circles have grown exponentially, and they've almost become a bit of a buzzword or even a requirement when it comes to developing as a medium. But today, I have a special guest for you. His name is Tim Thomas, and he is a gifted psychic medium. At one point, he actually helped to put these circles together, and he started to notice that there was some pretty interesting, shady things going on. And he wrote this article that I thought was absolutely fantastic. It highlighted some points that I've always been concerned about, but pretty much kept to myself. And it was so beautifully written that I asked him to be a guest on this show, because as a developing medium, I want you to be armed with good information. I want you to know what a good circle looks like versus an unhealthy, toxic one. I want you to have the tools of the trade so that you can shine bright and be your best self and be an amazing medium. But in order to do that, you have to know what to look for and what to avoid. So with that, here's Tim. So Tim, welcome. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Right. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I have kind of an unusual background, but I am a psychic medium. I have been doing this stuff for a number of years, but I come to it from a background of somebody who is very analytical, very skeptical. I had some experiences when I was young and then sort of dismissed it and put it away for a couple of decades. And then, my mother's passing is really kind of what triggered a change in my beliefs and sort of rekindling an interest in all this stuff. And then it sort of, very quickly took off from there. And so I've been doing, readings for about 7 or 8 years now. Started off more so in the realm of psychic, because that was sort of what was natural to me from my background and made sense to me. But I quickly found that mediumship was coming in, much to my surprise. So I spent some time developing that as well. And making a lot of mistakes along the way, and learning some lessons, which is, part of what I think we want to talk about today as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, for most people watching this, they're very interested in mediumship. They're interested in how it works. And, a good portion of those people, of this audience, is wanting to develop their own ability to connect with the souls on the other side, with the afterlife. And, you can't be in the mediumship field without hearing about development circles. Like almost every book you read, every course you take, every YouTube video out there is going to recommend, or seems to recommend, a mediumship development circle. And you've had some interesting experiences with that. In fact, it's one of the reasons I invited you onto the show. So you had this fascinating article that you introduced a few months ago on how mediumship development circles can actually prohibit one's spiritual and mediumship growth. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about this. So tell us how you got involved in mediumship circles and what type of behavior or practices were you seeing that alarmed you?
Yeah, so like you, I had the same experience, and like I'm sure a lot of your viewers, where you read these books and you hear about it, and they talk about circles and practice circles and development circles. And so, right away I'm taking note of, this is how you develop. And I know for me, a lot of the books that I was reading tended to be from mediums that are in the UK. And I didn't realize at the time some of the differences that happen over there versus here. And one of them being the spiritualist church is very big in the UK, very big, particularly compared to here, where it's, I don't want to say almost non-existent, but very small compared to other religions and places of worship. But in the UK, the spiritualist church, all of their services have contained mediumship. And those churches generally offer development circles and some type of practice circles. So you have, in England or in the UK, I think definitely more than 1,000 of these spiritualist churches in a relatively small space. So it's fairly common to be able to go out and find, a practice circle or development circle. And so when you read these books, and if you're in the United States, you think, oh, that's the way to develop. And so sometimes you can find, like for me, I would look at the local metaphysical shop, or I think I found, something on Meetup, and you get excited and you find these circles and you think it's going to be great. And it's like the books tell you this is what you need to develop, right? So you're all excited to go to them. And there are some good things about it, right? You've got, presumably a safe space where people aren't going to think you're insane by, going and practicing the stuff and learning about it. But what you quickly realize, particularly in the States, is there really is a lot of challenges with taking that approach, and it is a little bit different here than in the UK for a lot of reasons. And one of the things I want to also distinguish a little bit, Nicole, is kind of the difference between what I would call a practice circle and what I call a development circle. Uh-huh. And the way that I, define those, a practice circle is really kind of a peer-led thing. You just go to a group, it's just a bunch of, like-minded people that want to practice, but there isn't necessarily a teacher or a leader that's organizing the whole thing, that's helping you with problems, that's lecturing, that's answering all the questions. It's more just kind of pure practice thing. And so when you read these books, they don't necessarily distinguish between those things very well. And so a good development circle can be found, and they're out there, but typically, it's instructor led. More often than not, it's something that you're going to have to at least pay a small amount for. But the vast majority of the circles that you'll find out there, particularly online, as I did, are free, peer-led practice circles. And when I first started looking into this a few years ago, there really weren't a lot of them online. So I would go to, Meetup or Facebook groups and try to find them, and they were a little bit hard to find. So I actually co-founded, this is a little weird to look back on, I kind of co-founded and co-admined a group that was sort of facilitating these and encouraging them and gathering a bunch of people together, say, hey, come join these groups and, go set up a Zoom meeting and go practice mediumship. And it was very exciting at the start. And I didn't realize until I started going to them and started seeing some of the things that were occurring that, oh boy, there's actually some harm that can come from this. And there's some, real major challenges that are occurring in that environment that aren't occurring if you can find like a teacher and a leader to actually help run things. So after about 6 months, I started seeing a lot of these problems. And after a year, I had to kind of step back and wash my hands of it and kind of say, there's a problem here. And the funny thing was people weren't talking about it very much. And so that, the article that you read, I was kind of like, I just got to put this out there because I want people to learn from my mistakes and my development, what worked, what didn't work, what was a challenge. And I had to tell people because I'm going to these circles and I'm watching good mediums backslide. I'm watching, other mediums that are in the exact same place they are a year later when they're going to 3, 4, 5 practice circles a week. And to me, that was just starting to become a little bit strange. So as I kind of got that new perspective, I started realizing all these, major things that were happening. And so, one of the things that's sort of inherent with a practice circle is people don't really develop there. They don't go there to learn. They go there to get validated, right? Mm-hmm. So it's kind of, it kind of has a different focus right off the bat because people don't go there and push themselves and try new techniques and learn things. They go there hoping that the person across from them is just going to validate them and tell them everything's great, right? So that in itself, it is a bit of a challenge, but there's all kinds of other issues that I see there and that I've encountered, and some things that sort of made my jaw drop. Like I can't believe I just witnessed that, and there's a lot of stories I could tell you here, Nicole.
Well, what's one practice that you saw consistently that was toxic, like something you may have seen repeating itself over and over again? And the reason I ask that is because people who are innocently going to these practice circles, they think they're development circles a lot of times. And validation is, of course, important because it helps people to know they're not crazy. They are making that connection. But like you also mentioned, if they're not in a development circle, they're not being pushed, they're not learning these new techniques. And so, of course, obviously, that's one way people can know the difference between development and peer is the way that the practice and sessions are going. But what might be a common thread or a common behavior that you saw that isn't very helpful? It might seem like it is at the moment, but in reality, it's not.
Yeah, I would say there's kind of two categories of things that generally falls into that I would see most consistently. And the first of them I would characterize as the reinforcement of bad habits, bad practices, bad mechanics within mediumship. Mm-hmm. So in these practice circles, what I realized is it was very, very common for the medium to, I'm going to turn my attention to the spirit world now and, connect with somebody. And then they would give evidence. And, these are all evidential mediumship circles. So we're not talking about, trance or any of these other kinds of things. This is supposed to be evidential mediumship where I'm going to the spirit world. I'm talking to your friend or your loved one that's here for you, and we'll have a message for you. But first, I'm going to give you evidence. And what I saw happening frequently is, the medium doesn't get the recipient to understand who it is that they're connected with. And so, and I'm not placing judgment on this. When you're new, it's hard, right? It takes practice and some learning to understand how to do that. But what I would find is that, and I kind of call this landing your link, right? So the medium, at least half the time in these circles, wouldn't land their link. And what would happen is they would still insist, well, I know I'm connected to this person, so I'm just going to keep giving you all this evidence, even though you have no clue who it is. And it was especially strange when you're, in a group of 7, 8 people and everybody's, scratching their head the whole time. Well, this person sounds interesting, but none of us have a clue who it is. And so after a while, I came to think about that, and it's like, it really doesn't show intelligence of the spirit world. Because if we've got 8 people gathered in a room, we're practicing mediums, we've all got, a minimum probably 5 to 6 loved ones and friends on the other side that we would love to hear from, right? And they all know we're here wanting to develop and they want to help us and encourage us. Why would this random quote unquote strange spirit kind of crash the party and interject? And why would that happen 50+% of the time? And so what happens was this was kind of normalized in these circles, and there was no teacher to say, whoa, this doesn't show intelligence of the spirit world, that you're not communicating the presence of the spirit world. And there's a lot of reasons, as I don't know if you do teaching, but there's very common things for beginners where that will happen. And there's things like they'll get the evidence, they'll be connected, but they'll interpret it a little bit before they give it, right? And so what comes in is correct into their awareness, but when they speak it, it gets twisted around a little bit, so the person in front of them doesn't understand. And so they're making the connection, but they're not communicating properly. But everybody's left wondering, well, who is this random spirit? It doesn't make sense. And another thing that happens frequently that I see with students is they'll connect and they'll get some of the information, but then they'll start sort of filling in the blanks themselves instead of just sort of letting things flow. But the outcome was a good chunk of the time, people were left thinking it was normal to be in a group and be practicing mediumship and connect to spirits that nobody understood. And that just never sat right with me. So that was one of the things. And there's a lot of reasons for it. I've given a couple, but there's the bad habits and the bad mechanics and, not showing the presence of the spirit world is definitely one of the things. And there's a lot of these things are things that any teacher, any medium that has some experience, they can work with beginners and correct those things very easily. But in these practice circles, sometimes these things would go on and be perpetuated, and people think that that's normal, and there's no change with it. the other thing that I saw that really made me say, well, okay, this isn't just keeping people from developing, this is actually causing some harm and hurting people. And it's what made me really step back from these practice circles, is giving messages that were harmful. So when we connect to the spirit world and we get evidence, it's supposed to be validated. So either it's validated or it's not, right? It's understood or it's correct or it's not. And that's sort of like a prerequisite before you give somebody a message. Okay, I've got your mom here, and I've got, here's how she passed, and here's the type of work that she did, and here's how many kids she had, and you give things, and then the person says, okay, I'm in. I know you got my mom there because you're giving evidence from her. But I would see people that would give messages that I know would never come from the spirit world. And so there's a few that I saw that just sort of, floored me. So I remember one example where somebody was connected to somebody's husband, and she was giving all the information about him, and then she was sort of adding to things. So the recipient was validating some of the stuff, but not all of it, maybe 70% of it. So they're connected, but then the medium said, basically, your husband is taking responsibility for his passing. And the recipient said, okay. And she kept going with it and added some information that was basically saying he intended to take his life, he killed himself. And after the reading, because another thing is she wasn't checking the evidence along the way to communicate, she just threw out a bunch of information and a message. And the one said, well, yeah, you gave some evidence to my husband, but it never even occurred to me that he might have taken his own life or thought about taking his own life. So here, that's a huge, huge thing to put onto somebody,
right,
when you can't prove it, because she's picking up what she thinks is his thoughts, his message, that kind of thing. But to me, that could cause real harm. So that this woman who, is coming to this circle to practice her own mediumship, and is probably excited that she might get a message from her husband. She gets a message, and now that will always be in the back of her mind, even though there might not be any shred of evidence that was what occurred, and it's probably not accurate. But there will be some part of her now that will forever think about that. So when I saw that, I was like, whoa, that's a little bit, something to be very careful of. And I've seen a couple other things too, and I'm sure there's lots of other examples, but just my own witnessing of it, I could name a few. I saw somebody where she gave some evidence to a woman in front of her and was connected to her father in the spirit world, presumably. And the woman was validating, again, some of the evidence, but maybe only about half of it was fitting. And I try not to laugh at this, but I knew the recipient, so we sort of laughed about it afterwards. Because the medium was then saying, well, I see your father, and he shows me, I'm seeing like his bedroom, and I see a dresser, and I see money on the dresser. And so the medium's mind leapt to, oh, he used to hire prostitutes. And I was talking to the recipient later, and she was cracking up, and the recipient said, oh no, that's definitely not my dad. I know he was faithful. He loved my mom. They loved each other. That would not be in his character whatsoever. But the medium kept insisting, well, this is what I'm getting. This is what they're showing me. I know that this, and so we had a laugh about it afterwards, the recipient and I, because I knew her. But the medium was just insisting. And what really probably happened, and I didn't follow up with this, but she probably did see, a dresser. The spirit communicator probably was showing her a dresser, probably was showing her money. But what he was probably saying was, I used to work with wood, and I built furniture and I sold it. But the medium is jumping to conclusions or filling in the blank, and suddenly this poor recipient is thinking, well, did my dad cheat on my mom with prostitutes? Right. Wouldn't have thought of it. So, there's a lot of messages and things like that can happen. And I heard about the one that made me just say, I have to walk away from this group. And I was sort of trying to steer it in a different direction and see if maybe we could change it into something else. But I was only the co-owner, so that didn't quite work. And it's okay. I don't judge people for having a different approach to it. But I heard about somebody that basically was working with a mom in front of her. She had, I think it was a son in the spirit world. And so she was connected to the son and giving some evidence about him. And then she was saying, but he's in a really bad place. And he's still trying to learn lessons, but he's not learning his lessons. So he's going to be in that bad place for a long time. And to me, that was like, whoa, that's, first of all, there's no evidence of that. Second of all, even if that's your belief system and that's what you're getting, there has to be a different way to deliver that, because basically the recipient in her mind, and I believe she even asked the person, well, is he in hell? So for me to realize the power of these mediums who don't have the training or somebody there to help them, to be able to now have a mother who's wondering, is my son in hell? That was like, I have to get away from this, because I can't be a part of perpetuating things that might, encourage this type of behavior. So that's really, really harmful. So it went beyond just frustration with bad mechanics and, lack of development, and even watching mediums kind of backslide, or, not progressing was very common, but watching mediums that were pretty good, sort of pick up these bad habits, get worse. That was bad enough, but seeing some of these messages, it was like, whoa. And a good teacher would be able to, or circle leader, would be able to step in and, either stop that and say, well, hold on, and let's figure out this, or figure out a way to deliver this that's accurate and reassure the recipient that, their son is not in hell. But without that, it's a really difficult thing. So there's a lot of different challenges and bad things that can come from it.
Because I am one of those mediums that do believe in the darker realms, but it's not hell, and it's not even torturous or anything like that. Like, it's where maybe spirits need to go to process what's happened, but there's always that evolution moving forward. And so to hear that there's mediums saying they're in a bad place and they're going to stay there for a long time, it's like, whoa, who are you to say that? Like, that's a horrible, especially to a parent. You can't say that to a parent. That's heartbreaking. So what advice would you give to people who are wanting to develop and, maybe all they have are practice circles around them? Or, I've even been to a couple of actual development mediumship circles, and those were toxic too, because, toxic leader, toxic circle. So, you need to be sure that the person who's, of course, running the group, no matter how gifted they are, is is someone that you jive with. You don't have to have the same beliefs as them, because we all have different beliefs, but still it should be someone that you resonate with. They should be patient. They should be challenging you, but not necessarily criticizing you and knocking you down, because I've seen that a few times too, where I'm like, ooh, that's brutal. Like, right. I'd gone to a weekend seminar with a pretty well-known psychic medium, and I was there after just one day, and after seeing the way that he was talking to these people, which you don't see on his YouTube videos, I was like, I'm out. I'm
yes,
done.
I've heard similar stories. Yes, for sure.
Yeah. And so for people, I bring that up to mention, like, it's really hard to find healthy ways to develop, and and I believe in constantly developing. So it's a struggle that I run into. So what advice would you give for people who are looking to develop, but there isn't a healthy circle near them? What are some things that they can do to progress and to, pick up, like you were saying, the healthier habits, and make sure that the path that they're on as a medium is the right one?
Right. Yeah, I think, there's a few things. So first of all, I think our relationship with spirit is going to be unique to us. And so another thing that happens a lot at these, whether it's a development circle or a practice circle, is mediums tend to sort of lose that and forget that, and they give their power away all the time, either to other students in the class or to a teacher. And so you want to always be careful of that. So I'm 100% with you. I'm always developing. I think people should always have that mentality. But also, you never want to give your power away. And when we talk about practice circles, you're giving your power away to somebody who might be inexperienced, who might not even be a very good medium. And we go to them and we're sort of craving validation, but that might not be the right thing. But by the same token, with a development circle, you have to be careful not to put any one teacher, too high up on a pedestal, because we're all human, right? And so sometimes you go to a class like you said, and right away, this isn't for me. This teacher isn't the one. Sometimes you go to a teacher for a while and you learn what you can, and then you realize, okay, it's time for me to move on, and maybe I work with my spirit team now and sort of develop again, and then maybe down the road there's another teacher that says some things that sound intriguing to me. So but you kind of have to not commit, feel like there's only one teacher out there for you and they have to be perfect and the circle has to be perfect. But you also, like you said, you have to be aware of the toxicity, and you have to experiment a little bit. So there's a few things that I would recommend. If you find someone who has a channel like you, where they have videos and things, or a blog where you can read, you can generally get a good idea if you're going to jibe with the way that they teach and they look at things. If your approach and your belief systems are pretty similar, or you're intrigued by them, it's a good indication that they might be a good teacher for you. I will say it's also for somebody like me, where I have such an analytical kind of approach, and I'm very evidence-based. I like to see the teacher's work. So I don't think it's out of line to go to a medium, not just to check them out, but if you're thinking, okay, this might be a teacher for me, get a reading from them and see if you like them and like their mediumship or their psychic ability. And hopefully it's also a good reading, and you want that for other reasons. But I think you can check someone out that way too, to understand if you're going to want to commit to a class or a workshop with them. And the other thing I'll say about that too, people who are good mediums aren't necessarily good teachers. And it's funny, because I never saw myself when I was younger ever wanting to teach. But anytime I ever saw a psychic, they always told me, you're going to be teaching, you should be teaching. And I would always laugh. I would literally laugh, because I didn't think that I would. But eventually, years down the road, I got asked to do it a lot, and eventually started doing it and found that I really liked it. But there are other people out there that maybe they're good mediums, and you'll watch them demonstrate, or you'll go to them for reading, but then you go to a class with them and they're not so great. And like your experience of seeing a teacher, but not until you get in the classroom with them do you really understand what it's going to be like. So you have to experiment a little bit and be discerning, and you may have to go to 3 or 4 different ones before you can find one you like. But you don't have to go to an internationally known medium that's going to charge you $200 just to sit in a classroom with 100 people for a couple hours. There are a lot of smaller teachers out there, mediums that maybe aren't well known. They might be somebody local that will generally have much more reasonable rates. So I actually mentored with my psychic teacher, who's just a local practitioner here that has no online presence, but she charged next to nothing. And you can go to you can look for these groups on Facebook as well, but you have to be careful and sort of discern between practice circles and development circles, and find one. You don't have to have like I said, this internationally known medium with decades of experience, but you should have somebody that is at least educated, has some experience, that they can land their links, they can answer your questions, and they can solve problems when they come up. And you definitely you want somebody that is going to be encouraging and make it kind of a safe space and everything, but you also want someone that's going to push you a little bit, because you're not just there to have somebody validate you all the time. When you're starting, it's great. You're happy to get any sort of link, right, and any sort of validation, but they should be sort of nudging you along a little bit. And I don't want to say pushing out of your comfort zone all the time, but there's times when you need that if you want to keep developing. But I think looking online, looking at channels like yours and finding people that way. The Facebook group I run, I recommend teachers in there that I've had some personal experience with or a lot of knowledge about. And you just, you kind of have to shop around and realize that there isn't going to be an exact perfect solution, but you may have to, try a few things out and see what you like and take what you can from one and maybe, move on and keep progressing with somebody else.
Right. Yeah. So, well, those are all good thoughts and that's good advice. So thank you for sharing that. And where can people find you?
So my website is mediumtimthomas.com. And that's where I have readings, and my blog is there. I do run the Facebook group where you found the post for today's topic as well. And I think it's called Developing Practical Intuition and Evidential Mediumship, which is kind of a mouthful. But the link for it is facebook.com/groups/practicalmedium. And it's a private group because I like to keep, things a very safe space there. And so people can ask questions and not necessarily have all your friends know that you've joined this group and everything, but people are certainly welcome to come there. And I post a lot of things on there, answering questions. I run classes that I list on there as well. And like I said, recommending good teachers that I've been through, and most of them are very, very reasonable. So, it would be great for me to say, oh, you can just go out and there's free practice and teachers everywhere. But the truth is, you get what you pay for to some extent. If you expect to go out there and have everything free and be great, you're going to run into some of the toxic issues that we said. And so, you can find some sources that are a little bit discerning that can help you, maybe find one that you're not just randomly taking a chance on someone, or you're not just chasing, the biggest name out there just because that's all you know of. So you have to do a little homework sometimes, but you can find good teachers out there that are very, very reasonable.
Great. And yeah, absolutely. 100% true. So, well, thank you so much for joining me today. And it was a pleasure having you here.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me, Nicole.